I'll do this one. Hello and welcome to a Crystal Rays review of the 2019 Marvel film, Captain Marvel. I was able to view this film for the first time on Disney Plus about 2 days ago, so I've just made a few notes on it and we can just go through them now, and hopefully, if I'm not too lazy, I will display them beside me if I've left enough room for myself. Okay, so we'll start off with the positives of Captain Marvel. Okay, so first off, for the positives. Overall, she's a good character, Captain Marvel. I like her revelation. Don't know how much to spoil here, and I think the conflict about which side to be on is quite well done. I'm not sure how much it is actually in line with the comics, because at the moment I'm reading that Kree Skrull War comic, and it's not really following it, although that was the old Marvel, so maybe they've changed a few things with the more modern comic. So yes, overall good character, maybe a bit bland, but we'll get on to that later. Brie Larson sells her story well enough. I think she does. She has a stolen past. Brie Larson, this is a hard role for any person to do, because Carol Danvers, as far as I'm aware, I haven't read any of the new comics, doesn't really have that many flaws other than she doesn't know who she is and that she needs to craft a new identity for herself. So to put someone into this role and be the figurehead of women in Marvel with not that much characterization beyond amnesia and being overpowered as heck, it places a lot of onus on the actor to make them likable, make them human, and make them vulnerable. And I think with what Brie Larson has, she does well enough with it, although I think it's symptomatic of what Marvel is today, owned by Disney and as part of the MCU, and what the MCU is and its identity, that it sometimes favours gags and humour, much like Star Wars now, over actual serious character development and the ability to engage and relate to characters. So Brie Larson does well enough, and she works that stolen past, the past stolen by the Kree, quite well. Kudos to her, even in the face of maybe some of her more strange interviews that I've heard of and the attitude that she took towards promoting the film on the press run. The chemistry between Nick Fury and Carol Danvers is good. That's practically the whole film when it's not set on the homeworld Kree. I can't really remember. It's like a buddy cop almost. You don't get much buddy stuff other than buddy cop movies, but yeah, it's just a buddy adventure film. Cross country, but not really cross country because it's like California over to Nevada. But I don't actually know where it's based. It probably is California, maybe San Francisco or Los Angeles. Some people could correct me, but maybe that's the movie's fault for not, giving me a good spatial awareness of whereabouts in America I am. As for the Nevada idea, I just got that from the fact that they go to a big deserty place. That's where all the military facilities obviously are. I mean, Transformers would have us believe that, and so would Independence Day, so yeah. So it's a good chemistry between Fury and Carol Danvers, although Carol Danvers is a bit wooden, as we've mentioned before. She is not condescending, but she definitely acts like she knows a lot more than people around her, and maybe she does, but then we find out she's also human, so I'm not sure where this sense of self-pride comes from. Maybe it's just the fact that she's powerful, and once again that leans into the problem of her character and how difficult it is to actually make her human again. Okay, so an especially enjoyable gag, maybe a bit generous, but one of the gags I did like more is the thumbprint gag in the military facility, how he takes the sellotape, puts it over his FBI or SHIELD identification that the military man has handled, and he takes the thumbprint like in Scooby-Doo 2, and he accesses the door and opens it, and then a few moments later, when confronted with another locked door, Carol Danvers blasts it open, and he asks her why they couldn't do it the first time, and she says, looks like you could handle yourself, and she didn't want to steal your thunder. Thought that was fine enough. Steal your thunder. There's some things in this movie that make you question, and maybe it's just a good part of setting it up in the story, but it makes you question is she really a Kree when she knows like axioms, as maybe not an axiom, but maybe a motto or a saying or a phrase such as steal your thunder. When it's an alien, sometimes like that Yon-Rol character, if that's what it is, I had to look it up, the Jude Law character, you don't see him saying that kind of stuff, so maybe we're supposed to be like, oh, this must be trying to inform us that in some regards she is human, and that we will later find out more on that. So Brie Larson surprisingly commands the screen. As I said, I wasn't a big fan of Brie Larson. I hadn't seen her in Room or Unicorn Store, the Netflix one. I think she directed that. The only thing I'd seen her in before this was as the minor role of Envy in Scott Pilgrim, Scott Pilgrim's ex-girlfriend. She plays that quite well. I think everyone can enjoy her performance in that. She's a platinum blonde in that. She isn't quite a more natural blonde. And the interesting thing about Scott Pilgrim is that it is now a film that almost had the foresight to be able to group together two would-be captains of the future Marvel MCU just as the MCU was getting off the ground, because before then I don't even think Avengers Assembles had been released, maybe just Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, maybe Captain America. So that's interesting. I think you've definitely got some foresight there. I've forgotten the guy who directed it, but he does like Hot Fuzz and Scott Pilgrim. Ben Mendelsohn as the Skrull antagonist. That was a confusing character because we never knew which side to be on. And in some regards, I would say that is maybe a good thing, because you're always kept on your toes. You didn't know if by the end he would, you know, call their bluff and actually be another, well, the only analogy I can think of is like a double agent, but he flips again, he's like against them, whereas he was using them to help them. So I think it was good to keep us on our toes and us on the edge of our seat, but then are you really on the edge of your seat if nothing's ever a problem with Carol Danvers? So although these are positive points, I feel like I'm finding a lot of negatives, which is very good. Okay, so finally on the positive points, it was a good origin story and it ranks among some of the better ones. Now I know it's an unpopular opinion, but Captain America is not simply a movie montage, it's actually an okay movie. It situates you well in the time period, it's a good period piece, likeable characters, it's fun, as other people have pointed out, it's very Raiders of the Lost Ark, very Indiana Jones inspired, and Iron Man as well is good too. So it's not as soulless as some of the other ones, as say perhaps Ant-Man or Doctor Strange, and I might catch some flack for that, but yes, overall quite enjoyable. Moving on to maybe the more negative things, and on a side note from here on out, it looks as if the captains of the Avengers franchise now must be blonde and must at some period wear a hat. So in honor of Captain America and Captain Marvel, we will wear our Ho-Oh hat as we continue on to the more negatives. And let's just bear in mind that it isn't a bad movie, okay? All movies have negatives, especially if you're trying to appeal to as many people as possible and trying to rake in billions of pounds or dollars. So, they tried a little hard with the music to date this movie in the 90s. I thought, although it did have its own original score, which we'll get to later, with some of the various artist tracks, you know how, so they'll grab some music that will set it in the 90s, some music that's synonymous with the 90s. I thought Come As You Are, a bit cheesy in the super intelligence scene. It was very like on the nose. It's like, oh, you're coming as you are, Carol Danvers. Finally knows she's Carol Danvers and not Veers. Bit cheesy. And then Waterfalls, which just seemed a bit shoehorned in the car ride to the military facility in Nevada or the desert, wherever, it could be Arizona. Silence is fine in movies. Silence can almost mean more than using various artist tracks, because it isn't necessarily a jukebox. I think it's maybe indicative of maybe more 90s and 2000s films, which is maybe why they decided to put it in there, as well as for dating purposes, as in like period dating, not like person-to-person dating. Maybe just remove those two and it would be absolutely fine. I thought that What a Man in the security officer's car in the car park was quite funny. That's an instance where you could get away with maybe putting in music because there's a reason for that music. He's playing it on the radio, whereas shoehorning in Waterfalls, maybe that was also in the radio in the car, but once again, Silence is fine, and Come As You Are wasn't really necessary. So maybe don't try so hard on trying to date it. Also, again, that was probably the most pristine blockbuster I have ever seen, and when she picks up the right stuff, I was wondering, are there actually VHSs in the store, or is it all just boxes? Okay, so the camera cut out again, I'm gonna have to sort that, but we were just talking about the confusing plot structure as the next negative. So the movie starts with the explosion, which we find out is related to later on in the film and is a part of the origins of Carol Danvers' powers as Captain Marvel. And that's fine, that's like a prologue. But then when you come to the Skrull memory device scrambling thing, where they're trying to access her memories and use her to focus to try and pry information from her memories, that was very confusing. To start off with a prologue like that with no information, and then to go to that after they are on the Kree homeworld, which we don't know much about that, with them fighting with Jude Law, or with her fighting with Jude Law, and then going to Torfa, and then that, it's just throwing you in the deep end. Maybe not the best call, but perhaps there was nothing else they could do for it. I wasn't in the writing room, I don't know what ideas were being thrown about, but that probably wasn't the best idea. Just saying for the future, but what's done is done. Not sure about Annette Bening as Mar-Vell now in the comics, or at least in the comic that I'm reading. I'm not a prolific Marvel reader, but in the comic that I'm reading, Mar-Vell is a man. I'm okay with gender swapping characters, it probably wouldn't impact Marvel, but Annette Bening, like, what does that mean for the prequel if they were decided to do it, having Annette Bening and Michelle Pfeiffer maybe in the same squad? I know she plays the Wasp and she would play Mar-Vell, but I don't see the impact of having Captain Marvel be a woman like Brie Larson if Mar-Vell was already a superhero but also a woman, unless they're retconning Mar-Vell's superhero past, if she was maybe just helping the US military or helping the Skrull trying to develop this hyperspeed, lightspeed engine. So are we retconning Mar-Vell's superhero past in favor of Carol Danvers, which I suppose is fine, but it makes it a lot like Green Lantern almost, with the crashing and then the bestowing of the powers, but I guess Mar-Vell doesn't give her the powers, she just gets them by accident, so yeah. The fight scene in Mar-Vell's space lab, now I thought that was a bit diffused because it subverts the final conflict with the young Rob, with the Jude Law character, who was set up from the beginning as her master. Now we had this student-master relationship and she wasn't able to defeat him without the powers, as we saw, and then she subverts it at the end. I don't know about you, but I would much rather have seen her fight him and win, maybe even with the powers, than what we got. Because what's the point of setting up that character? Maybe he'll come back, maybe they'll have a conflict, maybe they'll find a way to remove her powers or disable them for a bit. But I think at the end of the film, I certainly felt a bit cheated in that we didn't get that fight. Because I felt like, and I keep saying I felt like, but it definitely seemed as if they were setting that up with no payoff. Also, she seemed very overpowered to face on both the Kree and the Skrull. So in that final conflict in Marvel Space Lab, she was facing on, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 Kree, and these were just random Kree you would pick up off the street in that Hallows the homeworld. These were actually military trained Kree that probably could have fought her quite well in that fighting simulation that Jude Law was in at the start, but she just kind of trounces them all. Like, it's fine that she's a superhero and that she has these powers, but it's almost bullying. I mean, I know they were trying to kill these innocent Skrulls, but it's quite unfair, and I would have preferred if there was, I don't know, more physical fighting, not just like throwing people about or blasting them against walls and whatnot. Like, she didn't seem to sustain any damage or any injuries for any length of time. Also, for the Skrulls on Torfa and in the Skrull space station that she kind of fucks up, she doesn't seem to have much of a problem. Now the Skrulls seem to do a bit more damage to her, but they also don't seem to pose much of a threat. Is anything a threat to Carol Danvers? Maybe we'll find out later on. As for the threats to Carol Danvers, what is more of a threat than Ronan the Accuser? And that was a real big problem I had with this movie. I thought it was fine to establish Ronan the Accuser as someone who was interested in wiping out the Skrull menace on worlds, and that Jude Law to call in and maybe report that C-53 Earth had Skrull Menace, and that to make Ronan Accuser aware of it, maybe setting up a second film. But to have Captain Marvel fuck up one of Ronan the Accuser's massive juggernaut fleet ships like that in less than a minute, she just tears through it and makes him kind of poops past a bit and leave. So she had a fight with the Skrull, then the Kree, then Yon-Rogg, and then a ship owned by Ronan the Accuser. I would much rather have maybe 1 or 2 final conflicts. I would like more physicality in the conflict with the Kree on the space lab, and then on Earth when she, I don't know, disables Yon-Rogg's ship. That would have been a fine conflict, because with these origin movies, they don't need to be big movies. They don't need to be Avengers-sized movies. The villain doesn't always necessarily need to be endangering all of the Earth all the time. So it would have been fine just to fight Yon-Rogg, and then in the sequel you could have brought Ronan the Accuser, having established him in the first movie. So showing that Ronan the Accuser throwing everything he has just about at Captain Marvel and still not being able to face her just paints Ronan the Accuser once again as a weak villain, just as he is in Guardians of the Galaxy. So Ronan the Accuser did not need to be in this film, was not a good idea. Finally, oh no, well not really finally for the negative points, but Captain Marvel's suit didn't really look the best. Now I know that it was a Kree suit that had a kind of colour change sequence. Thought that was a bit cheesy the way they established that by just pointing to the top and being like, we're on the same team, US Air Force colours. Fair enough. But the suit didn't look very good. A bit crinkly, almost the Kree original colours look better, and I suppose they would if it was designed around their colours and around them. But it's not much of a problem, because most of the time the superhero suits are changed up for the sequels and also the Avengers films. Just look at our other Captain America. His change from the first one, thank fuck, to Winter Soldier looked a lot professional, and then even into the likes of, I think, Civil War and Avengers Assemble, looked a lot more built for purpose rather than built for flashy comic book relation. Also, I'm not a big fan of the Flurkin being the cause of Fury's eye patch, because you could have had a movie dedicated to Nick Fury following this. I didn't realise Nick Fury was quite as old as he was when he became aware of superheroes. It kind of fucks up my headcanon of it. I thought it would have been quite young, involved in maybe military missions, even though he doesn't have any superpowers himself, unless he maybe does in the comics. He's kind of a badass, and maybe he lost his eye in a fight, but no, it was a space cat with tentacles. So not everything needs to be played up for laughs once again. I know Star Wars does this quite frequently, but Marvel, you can be serious sometimes, and silence is fine. The grounded choreography, as I mentioned before, so the physicality is missing. Captain Marvel feels very floaty, nothing affects her. At the end with the fight on Space Lab, it could have been more physical. An example of this physicality was in the tremendous choreography of movies like Judge Dredd and more recently Birds of Prey, and I think that is also in tandem with how well these movies were sound mixed and sound edited. I don't know much about post-production, but I would kind of think that is where the sounds for punching and hitting and whatnot are integrated into the choreography that has been filmed. It was very good. You could imagine how sore some of those injuries that they sustained from the likes of the Sirens of Gotham would have been. So definitely try and integrate more of that Marvel, because at the moment it's feeling kind of airy-fairy, especially in the likes of Endgame with how many people were fighting on screen. Moving on to the OST, as mentioned before, Captain Marvel theme, as you might expect for a captain, is very grandiose with the building strings. It's nice, it's very evocative of the Avengers and what that embodies. And then the Waking Up song, which is in the soundtrack, if you look it up, it's one of the tracks, is reminiscent of James Horner with vocals and synth, which grounds us very much in space and otherworldly, because James Horner, as you know, did Avatar and he did Titanic, so it's very, I don't know, ethereal, very heavenly. So it's fresh, but at times very safe soundtrack. So I wouldn't really give it a listen, because there's better things you can listen to. Okay, here are my questions round. So, how can she be affected by a stun on Torfa, which is the planet they raid? And I'm not even sure why they raided it, because I think I missed it. Like, it's one of those movies at points where if you aren't paying attention the entire time, there is quite a lot you can miss. So if she's being stunned on Torfa with the same purple lightning energy stuff and is able to be knocked out, where this she still had this energy that she has as Captain Marvel. It's not been fully realized yet, but she still has it to the same degree. So if she's knocked out on Torfa with the same thing, and then she's stung twice on the Krull ship almost at the same time with the same beam, how does that not have the same effect? How is she not put out cold? How is she not unconscious? It just seemed a bit lazy. Maybe someone can explain that. Maybe it's because it was a lot closer in proximity, but they had it on spears on the Skrull ship, sorry. So, I mean, anything that contacts you, it doesn't really matter how close the person is, because it's still contacting you, Secondly, who built Mar-Vell's lab? And did the US know about it? If Mar-Vell was working for the US Air Force, like creating these Lightspeed engines, did they know about the lab? Who built the lab? How were the Skrulls living on the lab, getting food? Maybe these are questions we're not supposed to ask, or maybe they'll be provided later on. Maybe there was a portal to Earth that they could get food. Maybe there was regenerating food, like in Snowpiercer, kind of like icky food made from cockroaches and maggots and whatnot. Why is the Supreme Intelligence an anti-Boggart now? And by Boggart, I am referencing Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, you know, where you stand in front of that wardrobe thing, and then it kind of materializes in the thing that you fear the most, so like a spider or a Jack in the Box. I haven't actually read the book, but in the movie it does. Why is the Supreme Intelligence now a Boggart? Because before, and I was looking forward to seeing it as this Lovecraftian tentacle green head thing, but no, it was just Annette Bening. Not for everyone, obviously. We didn't see anyone else's super intelligence because this is a Carol Danvers movie and we are from her perspective. But I didn't get that changed. Maybe it's changed in the comics. Sorry, we were just talking about how Carol Danvers is able to breathe in space. We don't know. Will we ever know? Maybe it'll establish it later. Maybe it was established and I wasn't listening, but who knows. And finally, will we ever learn about the Emperor Skrull or Super Skrull and their attempt to destroy all of the Inhumans and the Avengers Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in the Kree-Skrull Wars? Now, if that's in a prequel and we learn that the Skrulls aren't always good, which is fine, we love nuance, but will Captain Marvel learn this? Will the relationship between Captain Marvel and the Avengers and the Skrull be a bit more grey rather than black and white if they learn that they tried to kill the Inhumans? Will the Inhumans ever come back? Who knows? So I liked Emperor Skrull. I thought he was an interesting character. I haven't finished the comic yet, but I'm over 2/3 through. And Super Skrull is a bit strange, a bit overpowered. We didn't have any of that Skrulls copying powers of the Avengers like we do in that comic. So maybe Annette Bening will face them, but then why would Annette Bening be trying to help the Skrulls as Mar-Vell if they were trying to kill the Avengers and Mar-Vell himself? Who knows? Maybe they retcon it. So further thoughts, and this is coming to the end of the video, I assure you. Will these new powers catalyze the breakdown of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Now this is a question I think a lot of people are asking, with people as strong as Carol Danvers coming into the fray and joining in Endgame, where so her exclusion from Endgame and the Infinity War saga may have been because of the lack of origin story and the fact that maybe they thought, oh, she could come around a little later, but she's been here since like the 90s, so I don't see why this Earth-threatening tyrant Thanos wouldn't be her problem. As I said before, maybe there is bigger fish to fry. How big are these? Is like Galactus and Annihilus from the negative zone. So I think they definitely avoided putting Captain Marvel heavily into Endgame because, as we know, she's not from Phase 1 or Phase 2. She's a late Phase 3 or maybe even Phase 4. So she's not part of the original Avengers. They didn't really need her. She probably would have fucked Thanos up really easily and it wouldn't have been much of a film. It certainly wouldn't have been 2 parts. So is it catalyzing the breakdown? I thought to myself, so we have 2 captains now. We'll have Captain Falco, or Falcon, because Captain America at the end of Endgame gives Falcon the shield. Is that indicative, or is that indicating that Falcon is now the new captain? Will there be an Avengers Light or an Avengers Earth who are perhaps more physically bound with the likes of War Machine, Bucky the Winter Soldier, Ant-Man, Wasp, Black Panther and Spider-Man, who have to stay rather grounded? They aren't super beefed up, so maybe they'll be fighting more earthbound evils, which seem to be becoming less and less prevalent. Maybe they'll bring them back because a lot of the origin stories don't have just these rather simple earthbound evils that's all threatening mankind constantly. And then are we going to have Avengers Cosmic, because the OP Avengers like Doctor Strange, Thor, Barbie, Captain Marvel, Scarlet Witch, and maybe Vision if he comes back, which he probably will come back. These people are not in the same league, as I think everyone knows, as the Avengers Earth, as I've just stated, so they aren't really needed to the same degree in some of these smaller villain roles. So maybe we could have like a smaller villain subset that aren't as threatening, and then we could have these like universal Earth-threatening villains that could either Avengers Cosmic could handle, or that they could come together and fight together, and then we could have these big Avengers assemble in phase 4 and 5 and onward. And then that leads to another question: how many Avengers or Marvel subsets or categories are there going to be? Because I think with the acquisition of Fox, they will have X-Men now and Fantastic Four. So with the Multiverse of Madness and this WandaVisions and these what ifs, is this gonna set the precedent for the fact that there's multiverses? I think in Endgame they already established that, because somehow, what's her name again? The Green Woman died, Gamora died, and there was another Thanos somehow. So was that multiverse, or was that going back in time and fucking shit up? I can't remember, but I think they will make a case for a multiverse, and that's how they can bring in the X-Men and how the X-Men are treated as mutants, not as superheroes necessarily. And that can be more conflict, and then you can have the Fantastic Four from yet another place, or maybe even establish it in the current MCU universe. And then you've got the Eternals coming, who are another subset, and finally you've got the ABC destroyed Inhumans. So we'll just see. But right now, Captain Marvel raises a lot of questions, and I think it's a movie that is good in coming at the end of this phase, because as I said before, she would have destroyed Thanos and there wouldn't be much of an endgame. Maybe she will head Avengers Cosmic, and Captain Falcon will head Avengers Earth. And the Avengers will get bigger, but more divided. So thank you for listening to this very, very long review. I apologise for how long it is, and I'll try and edit it down. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed it.